And we have Mathew Krueger with us today of the fantastic, fabulous Walking with the Tengu podcast. I found you through a mutual friend of ours, and I hope that he actually gets in to podcasting again here in the next few years. And that is our gentleman over at Martial Thoughts.
Oh,
And
right.
yeah. So I'm glad he's doing well, and I'm glad he's still got the podcast up there and working. But I went back and started listening to his show, and I came across a couple of talks that you guys had, and I'm like, oh, that's a really good topic. I really like what this guy's saying, and then I found Walking with the Tengu from there. So Mathew Krueger, where are you visiting from today on our show today, sir?
Today I am in Anchorage, Alaska, way up north. It is a bright, sunny, hot day, about 62 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
I just got done camping with my kids in the backyard last night, and we're getting ready to head out into the mountains in a couple weeks. So I wanted to make sure we all survived, and we died last night because my daughter had a piece of candy, and there were 2 rules: no boots and no food in the tent, because you're just a Lunchable to those bears out there. So,
oh my gosh. Yeah. I get what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. So yeah. Good dad. I grew up in the mountains of Colorado, and I was like, oh yeah, we got moose, we got bears and all this stuff. And I stayed one summer with a horrible ex-girlfriend in Wrangell, Alaska.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And little island, not an Aleutian, but one closer, sure. Vancouver and Washington State.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget this. And this is very Alaskan. I felt like I could hear the theme song from Northern Exposure playing in the background. So my friends and I were out camping a little bit. We're just grilling some meats up. And they had selective cut some of this area so you could actually see down into the sea.
Yeah.
And this giant bull moose comes booking about 100 yards, not towards us, but towards the water. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, yeah, that guy's way bigger than our mooses. Because I mean, this guy had to be like 7.5 foot at the shoulders,
sure,
and he had the full rack.
Yeah.
He was scary. What was horrifying was seeing this grizzly running after him. Like, and I've seen bears all my life. I've never seen a bear that big. Like, he was hauling ass after that moose. The moose hit the water, and I want to say another island. I mean, it was maybe 3 or 4 football fields away, this other island. So the moose, you see his antlers going across the sea, and the bear just goes right into the water after him. Like, I don't want to know how that horror story ends. But yeah, you guys definitely have bigger creatures up there. And surprisingly, some good martial arts up there too. Could you tell us your martial journey, sir, for the audience that's not familiar with you?
So it actually, like so many of us, I hear this come up a lot on podcasts when people talk about their origin stories, so to say. As a little kid, I got into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Karate Kid, the Steven Seagal movies, the mid '80s ninja craze, all that stuff. And so there was this sort of like love of the mythological, the idea of the martial arts. And I lived way out in the middle of nowhere in upstate New York. Closest people were probably, I don't know, a good half hour away. The closest town was about an hour away. And so I grew up running around out in the woods, punching trees, throwing rocks around. And, there wasn't, people don't know how good they have it today with the ability to do research and learn, and the access to not only teachers, but just information in general. And it's kind of hard when you're isolated like that to come up with anything useful. But in the 4th grade, I came down a slide and got punched in the face by another kid I'd never seen before. So bleeding from my face, I went in, and the nurse cleaned me up, and the principal came to talk to me, and I was able to identify who it was. Well, it's his word against yours. Too bad. And it was that point I said to my parents, I'd like to learn how to take care of myself. So they took me down to the local strip mall and put me in a Taekwondo class. That went for about a year. Then we moved away. And I loved it. And they have to understand, I love that Taekwondo class. That was so much fun. I love learning the forms. I love, punching and kicking and sparring. It was a blast. So moved back to so that was actually up in Alaska. It was my first time up in Alaska.
Okay.
Moved back to New York. We traveled around a lot. My dad's a scientist, fish genetics. So he came up here and
that makes sense.
wrote a big, thick book about Western Alaskan salmon, not Eastern, Western Alaskan salmon. Very, very specific set.
That's funny.
So I went back to New York. I got 1 month of Aikido in at the local YMCA. I love my parents, but they were not particularly interested in having me do any martial arts.
Sure.
So they weren't opposing me, but they weren't supporting me either.
Okay.
So that was my childhood of martial arts, pretty much. Any kind of magazine or book I could pick up at the library, run around in the woods, and then that 1 year of Taekwondo, that 1 month of Aikido. Fast forward to 1998, I went to college. I go into the dorm, and being as young, stupid college guys are, we grabbed all our mattresses, threw them in the common area, and decided to wrestle each other. Well, there's this other guy there. We called him Grandpa. And the funny thing is, I'm 15 older now than he was then, because he had been an there wasn't really MMA. It was called Vale Tudo, but he was like an ex-MMA fighter. He had fought a bunch of bouts in Vegas. He was a purple belt under Hoist Gracie, and he beat all of us with his hands in his back pockets. And I was like, man, just his legs. He just wrestled us with his legs. It was incredible. And like I said, he was 10 years older than us. We called him Grandpa. And I was like, I got to get some of that. So I trained with this guy every other day for the next 3 years. So until about 2001, when I headed down to Atlanta, got a job as a programmer. My boss was taking Wing Chun. He said, hey, we got jiu-jitsu down there. So I said, okay, I'll go check it out. So I went down to Steve Grantham's academy. It's not around anymore. But jiu-jitsu came an hour later after I got off work. And in that hour in between, there was Wing Chun. So I said, well, rather than sitting around doing nothing, why don't I take Wing Chun too?
Sure.
So I took Wing Chun at that school. It's a Pedro Sauer affiliated jiu-jitsu school. I'm not sure of the lineage from a Wing Chun standpoint. You have to understand it's like 24 years ago now.
Sure. Yeah, I get it. Like
but I trained a year of Wing Chun. I trained a year of jiu-jitsu there. And that was where I really saw for the first time the possibility of cross training. Because, remember, I trained with this Vale Tudo fighter for 3 years already. I had another, we had various people come in and out training with us while we were there in college. But, you learn to feel how a person moves. And, the wrestlers, the judoka, the Vale Tudo, the MMA guys, they were different. But this Wing Chun guy, he had a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You could feel his Wing Chun in the way that he wrestled me. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. I got to get me some of that. So from that point on, whenever I moved somewhere, I always look for a jiu-jitsu school, and I always look for something else to train in. It had to be different. It couldn't be like very close to jiu-jitsu. Long story short, more years pass. I moved back to Alaska. I come up here to be a cop. About a week before I'm going into the police academy, I get a bit. It's not a big injury, but a little bit. It was close to an injury in one of my arms. I was like, well, I don't want to go into the academy broken. So I put the jiu-jitsu training on hold until after the academy. That short period of time turned into 8 years of a break from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where I did traditional Jiu-Jitsu. While I was doing that, I also trained Chen-style Tai Chi at a local Wutan school. And then, get a little Tai Chi, get a little traditional Jiu-Jitsu. 8 years pass, I get married, have my first kid on the way. I'm like, man, because the cool thing about all these other places was the ones I ended up in were always very open to cross-training too. So like at the traditional jiu-jitsu school, they're like, well, why don't you teach us some of this Brazilian stuff? And I'm like, all right. So, we were like 90% of the time doing traditional jiu-jitsu, and they were like, well, let's see what some of this other stuff is. So they let me do a little like mini seminar on the basics of Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
That's great.
Kind of got to tread water with that throughout the 8 years, never really stopped, but didn't really improve a whole lot.
Sure.
So I think from a timeline standpoint, we're about 2014 now. I go back in, to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school, and I've been there ever since, basically. But I always got to be cross training. So for a while there, I did Yang style Tai Chi with a local university program because I had a friend that was doing it. He wanted some other people there, and I was like, I'll show up. I'd love to do that with you. So I kind of accidentally fell into that role. And please understand, I am not a legitimate Tai Chi person. Please understand that.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
But it was a ton of fun, you know, getting to contrast between what I was taught with Chen style at Wutan, and then
Sure.
you know, this guy, he was from mainland China. He's back there now. And he was doing what I like to call the kami short form, the 24 Taolu, you know. So but it was fun to play with it in a different context with different people, because what I was seeing there was a different student base. The people that walked into his Yang style Tai Chi class were very different from the kind of people that were showing up to the Chen style Tai Chi class. You know, they also had praying mantis, they had the typical Wutan stuff over there. But the people I was working with in the Yang style class, I could see them getting better at things like balance, walking, getting up off the floor. And it occurred to me, the old ladies, not just them, but primarily old ladies coming into the Yang style class, they're the ones that when predators walk down the street, they say, that's a potential victim. That's someone I can take advantage of. And what they were getting from that Yang style class was the ability to move more confidently through their environment and look less like victims or potential victims.
That's amazing.
And that was one of those moments where I was like, okay, it sounds like a cliche, but it's not just about fighting.
Yeah.
You know, if I can take someone who would normally look like an easy target and make them look less like a target, then that is a big success for martial arts.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
There's a metaphor that I came across in the law enforcement field. I'm sure it's in the military field as well. But this idea that there are people who are sheep, there are people who are sheepdogs, and then there are people who are wolves. And I came to the conclusion that that was an okay metaphor, but it was not complete. So I like to think of a fourth category that I call the porcupine. Soft and squishy on the inside, but darn it, if those predators think twice before biting that porcupine.
That's exactly right. I love that. I love that.
They
Yeah.
look like a hard enough target that, you know, the lion, the tiger, the bear doesn't want to tangle with it, you know? And yet, and so, you know, no discredit to anyone or anywhere, you know, we need those sheepdogs out there, but that doesn't mean we all have to be sheepdogs. You know, some of us are perhaps called just to be the porcupine. So getting to the end of this long diatribe.
You're good. That's why we're here, my friend. That's why we're here. Please continue. We want to hear about everyone's martial story. Yeah.
Continuing with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I have continued to work I'm teaching lunch classes now, just a purple belt, but the lunch classes have given me a opportunity to focus so at our school, we have 5 black belts, and that's kind of unique in that they each have a different style that they have expressed. So like one guy will be like big and tankish, and my primary teacher, I would say, she's 120 pounds maybe, and you know, a third shorter than me. And I want to be like her when I grow up, because she can take on anybody walking in. She can, you know, it's incredible to see, like, people will come in and look at her and be like, oh, this will be someone my size. And so what's cool about this is we have an overarching curriculum. And the reason I'm talking about this is because this is critical to where I am in my own martial journey right now, which is a lot of times you have, you know, like that master and apprentice dynamic. And you don't get that a lot in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you have, someone's affiliated under, and Roy Dean is a good example. Roy Dean, you know, who has an Aikido and a traditional Jiu-Jitsu background. I like him because he's very also about the cross training. But you know, his his students under him that, you know, they're very different, but they are also flavored in his style. So what I have here in this situation is 5 different flavors that I can then draw from. Someone specializes in leg stuff over here, and someone specializes in takedowns over here, and this person over here has a Division I wrestling background, and this person over here is a tiny woman, and you know, so you know, all those different perspectives give me a bigger library of people to draw on when I'm trying to develop my own style of jiu-jitsu.
Very, very much so. That's such an interesting and a fascinating point. I kind of wanted to stick there just for a little bit. Do you feel training in other, system styles, Quoons, dojos, whatever they want to call them, that Brazilian jiu-jitsu has a better dialing in factor and adaptability to the individual? Because I mean, I'm sure we all have to start at a base, somewhere, just like karate or Wing Chun. There's a base for everybody. Your roux gravy, if you will. And later on, you can decide if you want it to be country or brown gravy or some kind of strawberry sauce, whatever it may be.
Sure.
But do you feel later on, around purple, blue / brown belt, somewhere in there, you can start to dial in and find an identity with the art itself?
I would say that's accurate. The picture I use with the people that I'm typically working with is of a upside down triangle expanding. And so you're starting with a very minimal amount of knowledge, and at least through blue and into purple, you're kind of expanding to find as much technical knowledge as you can. But from somewhere around purple, that starts to diminish, where you're reducing down what you do to what I would describe as your game. But you can't select moves to put together in a strategy without knowing what the options are. So you kind of have to learn too much, and then you need to make it efficient, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So, from that standpoint, I don't know where it's not going to be the same for everyone, but that's, it's typically around the stage where I'm at right now, where I know I'm not doing a bunch of upside down berimbolo, gogo plata. Stuff. It's just not my style, I might be able to technically reproduce it, but I'm not using it against a competitive opponent.
You're not doing locks in the air. You're not doing like a flying scissor kick into an arm bar okay, that's fair enough. I probably wouldn't do that if I did BJJ too. So
in judo, they have something called toku iwaza, which is like the techniques you specialize in. And it's the idea that, maybe you learn all the throws in judo, but then you specialize in 2 or 3. You find your toku iwaza, and those are the ones that you're known for. And it's kind of like that. It's a little bit more, I would say, wider in breadth technically than just finding like 2 or 3 techniques in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But it's the same idea where you may know all the throws in judo, but you specialize in 2 or 3.
We do that with our Xingyi. We've got the I do the 5 elements, 12 animals system, and you have to put in the work and the time and the labor with the 5 elements, because that's where the magic is. That's where the body transformation is. That's where the power generation is. On top of that, doing the Santisha posture. But when you get into the animals, there's usually a way. A lot of people start with tiger and then move on to dragon and other things from there. And we kind of have specialty animals as well. It was funny because, I listen, and Owen and I listen to the Drunken podcast a lot with Byron Jacobs over in Beijing. And he said this, and it's something that Owen had told me when I started the animals. I'm like, look, there's another resource. But Owen told me the animals. He's like, okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to start teaching you the animals, but you're going to probably specialize in 3 to 4 at the most. And I was like, no, these animal forms are tiny. I'm going to learn them. I'm going to specialize. And it was like that piece of steak that you put in your mouth that's really small, and you keep chewing, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And about 5 animals into that system, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to specialize. Because it is these animals are so rich, with the you're developing a psyche element, a body element, an attitude element with them. So it's very fascinating, but it's so deep. And so like you're saying, it's like, well, you've got a few that you have to look at and specialize in. So.
that's I think that's a good example of how there is a lot of crossover in principles between martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
I remember hearing people talk in the Xingyi group that I was working with in Taiwan about the different animals, and I didn't have enough knowledge then or now to know what each of that means specifically. But I mean, a person can guess. If you're
Sure.
very aggressive, you might fall into certain animals. If you're kind of more strategic and quick, you might fall into a different set of animals. But that same idea was exactly what I was just talking about.
Sure.
Finding
Yeah.
your animal in jiu-jitsu, I suspect, is similar to finding your animal in Xingyi. And the way I describe it often to the students that I'm working with is like, you start off and you're learning 10 things, and that's all you got to worry about. You just learn those 10 things. And once you learn those 10 things, you realize there's 100 things out there. So
Yeah.
you buckle down, you
Yeah.
learn those 100 things, and then you learn them all, and you're like, well, you know what? There's actually 1,000. And it never ends. It's just, there's always something more to dig deeper into something, and you can't know everything, until we figure out how to live multiple lifetimes. We're gonna have to
I don't know. We might be a little closer than we think. I think that's a great way to segue into, at least talk about just for a second, the reason we have principle-based training.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens is people will have this huge tree and they keep going to the branches and the leaves, the branches and the leaves, the branches and the leaves. But the DNA is contained in that tiny acorn or that root system. And so I think that's why, okay, you've got 10,000 things. How do you manage that, like mentally, physically, when you're engaging somebody, or even tactically? And I think that's why something like a BJJ, or a judo, or whatever it may be, if you find a principle-based teacher and a principle-based art, that's when you really start to learn, the management skill. Because if you're technique-based, I really believe that it's this giant Rolodex of 100,000 techniques or applications that have nothing that bind them,
Right. Yeah.
So,
there's no overarching strategy to make it all work together. It's a ton of puzzle pieces, but they don't necessarily connect up.
That's it.
One of the things that I really see as a credit to Xingyi is the fact that built into the system is this idea that not everyone's going to fit in the same box. You're not trying to make everyone a carbon copy of the same martial artist. You're looking at the qualities and the traits of the individual and tailoring a game. I am sorry to use that term, tailoring a strategy.
It's fine. I like it.
Tailoring the training around what makes sense for that person. And whereas in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's kind of accidental that it ends up, you have a framework in Xingyi, because I think just because it's been around for longer, that it makes sense to fit people. They've addressed this challenge before, so maybe in 100 years Jiu-Jitsu will have this, but
I get it. Well, I mean, you look at the founder of Goju-Ryu. He had, what was it, 12 overarching kata, and he would prescribe. He's like, everyone's learning these 3. And then from there, or everyone's learning 1. And then from there, you'd get either 3 to 5. And after he passed, I've talked to my friend, I call him Goju Spencer. Shout out to Goju Spencer. Who moved over to Tokyo. I think him and his family now are 5 or 6 miles outside of Tokyo Disney. And he's a Wing Chun cat and a Goju-Ryu cat. But the thing was, he's like, what got lost when he passed away was what was his prescriptive method into, okay, this person needs this kata, this person needs this kata. And I think in a way it's stuck around in Xingyi. I'll give you another art that does that. And a gentleman we've had on the show is Sifu Russ Smith.
Oh, right.
Russ Smith does Wuzu Quan, or the 5 ancestor systems. And I always forget the 5th, but it's Southern White Crane, it's Southern Lohan, it's Taizu Quan, and it's monkey boxing. And I can't remember the 5th one, but that's kind of where they have the body softening and the body hardening stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
And but he, him and his Sifu Mark Wiley, who was a student of Alexander Coe, God rest his soul, has passed away.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, this is the core of the system. You have to know this at least 1 monkey form, this at least 1 white crane form, this 1 at least Taizu Quan, this 1 Lohan, and these 2 or 3 Qigong, Neigong practices. And then from there, we can move you into, This guy is a little more of the monkey style, or this guy can dabble over here. And so that's the other thing too, is it's not just like, okay, Randall's short and stocky. He only has to do Taizu Kwan. One of my favorite Shingi animals is actually monkey. And I like to play outside of, that monkey is my mental characteristic. And I try to be light and fun. And so it's fun to dabble in areas that you might not be associated with, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. It helps challenge you. It helps focus your challenge to help you grow in ways that maybe you wouldn't normally, just, left to your, the box that you've been put in, So
absolutely. So tell me about your martial journey. And you also have, you've done some Iaido, is that correct?
Yeah. We're actually getting to that. I'm almost done.
Go for it. Keep going.
Left.
Go.
We get the big bomb of COVID, right? COVID changed how people train.
Yeah,
right.
100%. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just to segue off of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, what I ended up was I had it was 2 doctors, an EMT, and 2 first responders, and we had a little cell, and we didn't train with anyone else. I have a training studio built into my garage, and so they came here. If one of someone got sick, they just didn't train for 2 weeks until they got tested and everything.
Sure.
And so we continued training throughout COVID with our little cell.
That's great. Good for you guys. Good for you guys.
So I mean, it was fun. It was helpful because a couple of them had kids too, and so my daughter got to keep training. Didn't get to I mean, we train like we have a family curriculum that we're always going through every week. We have a move of the week that the entire family is working on.
That's so cool.
They're not big enough yet for me to really crush them.
Good on you, man. Good on you.
So both my kids, they're getting to the size where my wife might be a good enough training partner for them, but they need people more their size. We can play, but they need someone resisting them full force, to really put pressure test things. But that's a sidetrack. So anyways, COVID happened, and I came across Sonny Mannon, another guy that's also been on your show.
Yes.
I had been watching his YouTube channel for, I don't know, maybe 2 years prior to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is really cool. Everyone in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu goes and does either wrestling or judo. A lot of them do Muay Thai too, but almost every Jiu-Jitsu school I've been to has a judo program, at least one class on the weekend or something like that, because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people suck at takedowns. They're like, the ground is my ocean, but I can't get you there. So, so they recognize that's a flaw. They go and get training from other places. Sorry, you're going to say something.
Oh, the Sharks don't have legs yet.
No,
not away from DC or King's Shark. They don't quite have the man body and the shark head yet.
Right. So we need to get some mutated robot cybernetic legs on that shark. And I was like, well, everyone does judo. I like judo, but darn it, I married this Taiwanese woman. I'm going back to Taiwan every 2 years. There's Shikai there.
Sure.
And then there's this Sonny Mannon guy. Why don't I see about trying to incorporate that into my jiu-jitsu? So I signed up for Sonny's program. Midst of COVID, it was challenging, of course, to get training partners, but I had a pool of training partners that were willing to work with me and willing to take throws and work through stuff. And I remember some of these throws I was working on the first time, I'm doing it, imagine I don't know, imagine Pichuan from Xingyi, and imagine someone saw the shadow of someone doing Pichuan.
Yes.
And then tried to replicate it,
Yeah.
That's what it was like when we were starting to try to figure this stuff out. But now, years later, every single jiu-jitsu class in the lunch crew, we start with 15 to 20 minutes of shuaijiao because it's been such a game changer for taking all of us that sucked at takedowns and getting consistent training that we can apply in our other martial art. And so basically I have 4 people who have been with me throughout the whole thing. One of them is that tiny Asian woman, black belt jiu-jitsu. She was afraid of takedowns for so long because she had been smashed by so many wrestlers that were just coming in and double blasting her and stuff like that. Her and other people have the confidence now to actually play the stand-up game. So, you know, a common thing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes is takedown week happens and no one wants to show up because everyone gets hurt. And so we found a way to using Shuai Jiao. And it's not that, you know, it's not that Shuai Jiao is the only choice. You know, there are many other grappling styles out there that this can be applied to as well. It's just, you know, I've got a single mom with 4 kids, overweight. She's not doing Division I wrestling training. I know that their wrestling style is more efficient. I'm using air quotes here if anyone's listening. It's not what she or I need to add a stand-up component to our strategy. So
isn't that interesting? Efficiency has a context. And you just pointed that out. Efficiency has a context. And, you know, if you're not, like you said, a college 1 division wrestler, you know, and built like, you know, a superhero, you know, that mom, that movement, that single leg takedown is not going to work for her because it's going to shatter a knee, break a hip. I mean, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I think we have to look at that as who are we training with and what are we training and putting things in context. That's a great point. Thank you, Matt.
So to be fair, every once in a while I have a judo person, they're good people, come in and they're like, well, you could be doing this a lot better if you did it this way. I'm like, you're absolutely right. I could be doing it better that way, but she's never going to train it if we do it that way.
Yeah.
So we do it this way so that she can get some throws in, you know? So Shuai Jiao became a big part during that COVID training. I
excuse me.
I was doing the Sonny had like there were like mini seminars each month where he had a curriculum that he was working through, and I did that for 2 years because after you get through his like online recorded videos, you basically get into a training group. You have a training partner, and you work with him and the rest of the group online on the little bit more of the advanced stuff. Really, what I'd like to do is go down and visit him at his school and train with him directly. But unfortunately, the time of when he was doing the seminar, I tried to make it work for 2 years, and it just ended up interfering with some family stuff that just I couldn't make it happen. So I haven't been in that group for the last year, but I want to bring him up for a seminar, and I want to go down and train with him because this Shuai Jiao stuff, man. If there's any Chinese martial arts there, artists listening out there, get some Shuai Jiao in there. It's going to like I love the way that Sonny will take Xing Yi and mix it with his Shuai Jiao. He's got this P1 entry to a foot sweep. I've been trying to pull it off. I haven't got it yet, but I'm going to get somebody with it at some point. I'm going to take P1 as an entry and foot sweep those people, and I'm going to be like, yeah, that's Xing Yi.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I love, you know, I kept seeing his stuff on the Instagram, and I was like, man, that guy really has something unique. And that's one of the reasons I wanted him on the show. And I really like how, you know, there's a part 1 and a part 2, and it's a long conversation. God bless him. I love that. But I've told a lot of people, I'm like, if you don't want to listen to part 1 and his background, because he's going to tell you, and it's great, listen to part 2. And he really, because Owen asks a brilliant question in that. Owen asks, he's like, okay, well, what's the difference between a Shuai Jiao throw, a Tai Chi throw, a Bagua throw, you know, and Sonny's like, God, you're the first person that's ever asked me this. And I've wanted to answer this forever. And so Sonny delves deep into what are the unique body mechanics that make a Tai Chi throw different than a Shuai Jiao throw, and what keeps it Tai Chi and not Shuai Jiao, which a lot of, you know, the village people method has interjected into their Chen style Tai Chi. But I like what Sonny says. He's like, listen, I get it. I know why they injected it because it's super useful. It's super good. But I wish they would give Shuai Jiao the credit that it deserves, that they're doing Shuai Jiao and they're not doing Chen Tai Chi. And I'm like, totally get it. Totally get it, man. But yeah, shout out to Sonny Mannon.
Definitely, man. I love that guy. I really need to circle back with him. It's been too long. I need to get plugged back in. But we're keeping it alive up here in Alaska. I keep hoping that I can invite other Chinese martial arts schools in town because I know there's a lot of divisions between the different martial arts styles out there. And I would like to try to bring more of us together. And if Shuai Jiao can be a connection for the Chinese martial artists in my town to see like, hey, we're not all thugs. We're not all jerks. You know what? I'd love to train with you, you know? So I'm hoping that will be an opening at some point. But we'll see. So to continue this, to have the final stage on this journey, accidentally and unintentionally, I've had a connection to Japan for quite a long time. And over the course of the last 30 years, I've been to Japan multiple times. I've lived there twice. This is prior to any connection to the martial arts. So the last time I was in Japan, I really didn't have anything other than that initial year of Taekwondo and that 1 month of Aikido. So I wasn't there looking at martial arts at all. I had nothing to do with Japan and martial arts, really. But back during those 8 years of traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu, similar story. I had a friend starting a Bato Jutsu class, and it was like a sword kenjutsu, sword martial art thing. And he just wanted some other people to show up to train with. And I was like, you know what, I'll show up, I'll start training, I'll support you and, get you off your feet and stuff like that. So I bought the Keikogi, I bought the Kama, I bought the Iaito. Long story short, no discredit to him, but it was a style basically created to milk foreigners for money. And it became pretty apparent quickly when I started delving into the history of stuff, because of the Japanese linguistic skills that I have, which is not great, but is enough that I can look at, there's these encyclopedias out there called the Buge Ryuha Daijiten, which is the encyclopedia of martial arts styles, and they're only in Japanese. And I think the last one was made in the 70s, but you can go back and you can look what was being listed. This is so-and-so, this is their style, this is what they train, these are their primary students. And what I was being told by the headquarters people, again, not my friend who was the teacher, but the headquarters people didn't jive with historical documentation. Now, always the possibility that something wasn't documented. The classic example, if you've probably heard this one on my own podcast, but the classic example of historical accuracy and mathematical accuracy are two different things.
Yes.
You and I know in our heads that Caesar crossed the Rubicon, but we cannot, with mathematical accuracy, prove that. Someone could have dressed him up in his armor and marched across themselves. He could have taken a different route. Based on the political and military conflicts that occurred after the crossing the Rubicon, he likely did. But we cannot tangibly, scientifically prove that Caesar crossed the Rubicon.
Right.
And so I acknowledge the fact that it's possible that something wasn't recorded, but there was too much inconsistencies, and the historical accuracy of what I was being told didn't match with what I knew to be facts. So I put that to the side. I'm like, well, this was fun. I like training with you all, but I'm going to go do something else for a while.
Cool.
Years later, middle of COVID, I'm like, I got this expensive sword. I really enjoyed when I was doing that other stuff. I wonder who's in town that teaches stuff with Japanese swords. So there was this other podcast. It's kind of inactive at the moment, called the Tokos Shikai podcast. Guy out of Canada was running it. And he was going around interviewing primarily Iaidoka, but then also some other of those more classical Japanese Budo people. So like Kyudo or Naginata or Kendo or Iaido. And lo and behold, there's this episode with this guy in Anchorage, Alaska, Masa Ando. I'm like, what? Wait, what? So I go and listen to it, and everything this guy is saying is he's like,
you're gonna have to send me that episode, by the way.
I will, absolutely. It was like, oh my goodness, this guy, we're in sync. He's saying the stuff I'm already thinking, and not in a sense we're exact copies of each other, but this is someone I could train under, because this is another dynamic in the martial arts that people often don't think about. It's not just about what you can get out of the martial art. It's also, can you and the teacher have a relationship that is effective both for training and for long-term community. And so a lot of times people talk about well, is the student right for the school? Well, that's fine. Well, are you right for the teacher is another question that needs to be asked. You could have an excellent teacher teaching an excellent martial art, and you are not the right person for that person to be teaching. So it was it was possible that this was not, this was one of those situations. So ironically, back in college, I took a month of kendo also, and turns out he's also part of the same kendo club that did that. And so I actually ended up.
Whoa, that's serendipity right there.
It was pretty strange. So I show up and I'm like, he didn't remember me, of course, which is fine. He's seen 100 million college students over the years, but I'm like, I've seen this guy before. I recognize him. So yeah, I ended up showing up, and then in the middle of COVID, because Iaido is a martial art where you don't touch each other,
Yep.
we were able to train in the same space, follow all the protocols, and I got started doing Iaido in the middle of COVID. So
you want to hear something? That right there was the first 2 episodes of Kung Fu Conversation. Yeah.
Right.
Owen, Owen and I talked about the weapons training and what's so great about it. And, where, we had a lot of friends that do BJJ. Owen's done it a little bit. I've done like an introductory, like a couple classes, stuff like that. And we had 2 or 3 good schools closed down because of COVID. And now, thank God, a few years later, most of them have reopened. But, we talked about that, with weapons training, because that's what Owen was doing. He's like, all right, everyone's outside and we're doing some sword work. And so, we had the Jian, we'd have at least a good 3 to 5 feet between us, which was great. And then for me, I was really getting back into the Wing Chun long pole. And I don't have a 9-footer. I got one that's 7'11", and then I had another person with a 6.5-footer. And so there's almost 20 feet between the 2 of us or more. And so I think that's the beauty of some of these weapons trainings.
Yeah.
So anyway.
No, it makes perfect sense. I mean, it's hard to keep training in a pandemic when your hobby is aggressive hugging.
That's it. That's aggressive pajama hugging. Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, the weapons definitely were a good route to go down, I think, for everyone. Which is an interesting point. I mean, so one of the things I've noticed over the years is the Chinese martial arts have more solo training methods built into their practices. It's not that that's the only thing, but there's often a component that involves, like with the Qigong, with the Neigong, body conditioning, body enhancement, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
It's like there's additional tools in the tool set with which to do your training other than just direct training. And it's not that it's a replacement for direct training, but it's supplementary to it. And it's not that every martial art needs it, but it seems to be an advantage in the traditional Chinese martial arts that it is more holistic. Actually, in your latest interview, I'm forgetting his name now, but there was some talk about health and about the need for medicine and for, I think it was in, Qigong and Neigong, where you take care of your body. You tear it down in training and then you build it back up afterwards with other things. And, in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community, I've seen them almost unintentionally develop their own Neigong practice, which is yoga.
Yeah.
Not everyone's doing that, of course, but
you were on Graham Barlow's podcast, and Graham does Xingyi, he does Tai Chi, he does standing practice, he does some Chole foot. I think he recently got into Wing Chun too. We've talked a couple times about that about a year ago, but he's been on Byron Jacobs' show, and they're both BJJ cats. But Byron's mainly a Xingyi guy. He's like, we have a moving practice with the Xingyi and the Bagua, the Tai Chi and stuff like that does things like yoga. I don't want to say a little better because that's kind of a personal opinion, but I think that learning some of certain Chinese arts and things like that can help prolong your lifespan in something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you're getting choked out, or the joints are turning in ways that they're not supposed to turn, things like that. So
you need it's not enough just to train. You have to have that recovery period as well. And the irony is, like, the Olympics are going on. All of the high level trainers and all sorts of other things know that you need to have recovery. Your body needs to heal itself after training. And yet, and this is one of the failings, I think, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is it's not really a martial art anymore. It's a combat sport, and again, I'm not saying anything's good or bad here about any of these, but like judo, like boxing, like fencing, it's a combat sport. It takes a subset of combative skills, turns it into a sport, which is actually, a lot of fun and actually a very useful training tool, but it's only a slice of the pie. And that's where in the Chinese martial arts, I see a wider slice of the pie where you see recovery practices, you see strength training. I mean, everyone's all big on kettlebells these days. That's great. But have you seen, I mean, I know you have, but I just speaking to the rhetorical people out there, what is it? The stone lock training in traditional Chinese martial, like they had kettlebells, hundreds of years ago. And, so at least from that standpoint, it's not that everyone needs to be doing the same thing, but I think in general, martial artists do need to look at widening the slice of the martial pie that they are eating, just to get a little bit more of a complete set of practices for a more robust training, personal training.
The first one of these, I'm calling this the show inside of the show. Sure. I ever did is on Instagram with a gentleman out of Hawaii by the name of Jack Gillen. Did you get to see that one?
Yes, I don't know. If,
and Jack, the Wave Chi Indian clubs, they're made out of hemp plastic. And Jack is 65 years old, and he's a BJJ practitioner. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, Jack practices BJJ at 65.
Yeah,
God bless him. And he's got two. Not only like the main guy that has his school that he trains at. Not only has he got him training with the Indian clubs, but I love this, and you'll get a kick out of this. I think. Do you have any teenagers yet?
Not yet. I got one that's trying hard to act like one though.
Jack has some, teenagers and 20-year-olds that are hip to it.
Okay, nice.
And it's hard to get the younger. I think that's more of an individual thing. I don't want to pick on a generation. I think people have done that a little too much with the younger generations. But he's got a kid that's like 18 or 20 that competes, and I think that's the reason. Because he can see, he's like, well, I trained a little hard the other day. I'm really sore. And that's another thing too, is you can go to somebody for a health, like a massage or something like that. Or you can pick up those clubs, you learn certain patterns, and it's self-regulation, it's self-massage, it's self-mobility. And so actually having that access to be able to heal the self, I think that's such a great thing and a great tool. To have.
And that's where, like, again, coming back to the Chinese martial arts, you've got things like Tui Na, you've got things like Qigong, not all of it, but some of it's quite a bit like stretching, you've got self-massage. I brew my own Dia Da Jiao in Cantonese, the hit fall wine, like, martial artists have been using that stuff for centuries, if not 1,000 years. It's hard for medical companies to patent a folk medicine, which is why they're not interested in dropping money into studying this stuff. But I can tell you, like, after getting annoyed at one bottle being $40 online, I started brewing my own. Everyone in my school uses it because we all get those pulled muscles, those cramps, those sorts of things. It's you got to take care of yourself. And if you're, it doesn't have to be any one of these things, but darn it, the fact that the Chinese martial arts have historically included a more robust health program should be something that people look at more closely.
Have you, I was going to ask you this, because I think you and I are about the same age, 79 or 80, sir?
45 here.
Yeah. So, I mean, what year? So, yeah. So you're 45. I'll be 45 in September. And so, I will tell you that at 45, I'm a little bigger, but I was always a big kid. But, I am more flexible and I am more agile than I ever was 30 pounds ago in my 20s. And I look at that, I attribute all of that, not all of it, but a lot of it, to things like the Xingyi and the Bagua. It was a weird thing too, because this was 2011-ish, and moved down to the Front Range with a girlfriend. She breaks up with me in 2012. It's a disaster. I'm in a dark spot. And one of my old white eyebrow, I did some white eyebrow for a couple summers, or Pakme. older gentleman reaches out to me. He's like, I think you would love the Shingi group here in Boulder. Why don't you try working with them? At the same time, I had an old powerlifting friend that I used to powerlift with in college. He's like, hey, are your shoulders still crappy? I was like, oh, yeah. And he's like, I found these plastic Indian clubs. I'm going to send them to you, and I'm going to send you a video. And I started getting the light Indian clubs. And here's an interesting thing, too, maybe a good topic. This is going to be a fun, long one, I think. I had a methodology of doing Tai Chi ball, like with a wooden sphere. Right, and I had a method of doing some stuff with the wide eyebrow with either stones, or I use shot put now, round balls. Sure. Yeah. Of like, it's a power method, but it's also good for the joints. And it's one thing to have the notes. It's another thing to actually practice it.
Yes.
And I think if anything, Owen taught me a method to practice. And I've tried to apply that into absolutely everything I do. So I got into the stone spheres. I found, the mace. Yeah. At about the same time. And then I found the heavy Indian clubs. And so all of these derive, which is funny too, because you're a wrestler, from a wrestling culture.
Sure. Yeah.
And then, later on the Europeans would take the light Indian clubs and make that a big warm up for their fencing work.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think for some reason in the West here, and I think it's probably what was brought over and how long somebody had lived in, whether it be Okinawa or China, those kind of things. But I think we're finding tools to regulate, to go along with what you're talking about, to stay out in the game longer.
Yeah. And the irony is, just like you just pointed out, a lot of these things have been built into other styles of folk grappling for possibly longer than recorded history. I mean, you look at any of the, from Shuaijiao to sumo, Okinawan tegumi, Mongolian bok, although I want to get back to bok in a second, but German ringen, Icelandic glima, Irish collar and elbow, man. If you want to get good at foot sweeps, Irish collar and elbow is just about kicking shin. Get some quality stuff there.
Whose book was that?
Well, I'm not going to try to pronounce that because it's Irish.
Hodon McFadden, something like that.
He has his own podcast, The Hero with 1,000 Holds. He hasn't updated it in a couple of years, I think. But if you want to get into like heavy, detailed history of various folk styles around the world, he's got some excellent episodes. But point is, there's a lot of different grappling styles out there, and they have training methodologies. Persian, I forget what it's called. Indian wrestling and Persian wrestling both have a lot of, Indian clubs.
Yeah. They call them, and the Persians call them the meals. MELEES, meals. And they're a different style. They're huge, and they primarily swing them on and off of the shoulder. And what's cool about those two is it's fascinating because the grip process is different for each of the clubs. Yeah. So I'll show you a little bit of I got stuff here in the corner. So this might kind of fascinate you a little bit. So for the lighter club, hey, look at there. I've got Jack's club here.
Okay.
So one of the original ways to do this is you can see this little ball.
Yeah.
I grip that with my pinky.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily hold the club like so. You hold it like this.
Interesting.
Your top three fingers are actually just moral support.
Okay.
It is your bottom three that you're learning to grip this club with, the weakest ones. And it is because you're learning the weakest ones that you'll have that great fencing quality in your sword work. And so, so the light club, you grip with the bottoms. Those heavy Persian meals, it's the opposite. You're going to go with the top three, and on those those huge wooden meals, you know what I'm talking about? They go a foot above their heads.
Right.
Their pinky is their balance point. And so when they swing these, that pinky is and they'll see them, and they're not only, you can see them doing just the upper body too, but they actually have a marching pattern with it.
Yeah.
And so you're getting that body unification of the core or the trunk,
Right.
which is spherically and cylindrically rotating and coiling. You're getting this wave pattern off of the shoulders and all these other things, and then you're getting that marching pattern also. And I find it completely fascinating. I think I sent you a link of one of the modern club swingers on that sword podcast. So you'll have to see what that cat's up to. But I think we're in a really special time for martial arts right now, not just modern martial arts, but classical martial arts as well. And I think we're finding the crossroads in what do we actually mean by cross training? You know, is it training? I mean, we're at a time now where I could learn Western boxing from a gentleman in UK. I can learn Indian club swinging from somebody in Iran. I can, and all these other countries that are involved at the comfort of my own little Colorado home.
Absolutely.
So, it's wild. Yeah.
It's amazing. It truly is. I mean, we're both old enough to remember a time with less access to information.
Absolutely.
And I think, with any technology, there's always benefits and drawbacks. Whereas before the problem was access to information, I have a suspicion that what we have today now is not, the problem is no longer access to information, but learning to discern between good and bad information.
Yes.
We have so much information that we can go down these tunnels into all sorts of varying qualities of good and bad info. And so that skill, we need that skill of learning how to discern what is good and what is bad when it comes to quality of information.
And it's so, I think that is such a fine edge to walk, because you look at how vast the Chinese systems are, not just with styles, but how they're taught.
Right.
That's really what makes them different is, okay, all of that is the Hebei. You've got 10 teachers that teach the Hebei style of Xingyi. They're all different. It's how it's taught and why it's trained is what makes it different. So do we worry about standardizing it? Do we worry about looking for a belt system for that? So it's a weird thing, but hopefully there'll be more people, like your Byron Jacobs, like your William Wayne Williams over there at Monkey Steel's Peach.
I love that guy.
Yeah, I do too. And he's got a big trip to Okinawa coming up very soon. And I'm very excited for him to do that trip. As a matter of fact, I think he actually might reach out to some point with my last Mathew that was on, Mathew Apsicardu, because Mathew's been to Okinawa so much. And he's got some good links over there. I know that I think the Budo brothers are actually going to Japan almost at the same time that Will is going to Okinawa. So I'm hoping that they get to meet each other in passing. And I know that the Budo brothers are looking for sumo culture guys. Which is another just brilliant martial art.
And definitely. That's a funny one. So I've started incorporating sumo into our lunch training because I needed, one of the principles I learned over the years is if you want to get good at something, you got to take other stuff away. So like if you want to get good at striking, take the grappling away. So that's why boxing, Muay Thai, you get really good at really good at striking. You want to get really good at grappling, you take the striking away. But the problem is you got to reincorporate all that stuff together again at another point. So in an attempt to get my jiu-jitsu people to simmer down with the ground stuff, I've been having us play sumo. We get a ring.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. I love that.
It forces us to play a game and change the context of the rules a little bit to get a little bit more work with the takedowns and the throws. But then we take that and then we reincorporate it back into our wrestling training. And so sumo, Shuaijiao and sumo together, because Shuaijiao, it's not the same, obviously, but Shuaijiao allows us to do that as well. So just finding, really at the end of the day, it's really finding ways to play, I think. If I can get them to stop taking themselves so seriously and just have fun, we can do more with our training time than if we're just constantly trying to kill each other.
The F word has gotten so much, and I actually talked about this with my other Mathew, and so here we go. And Owen talked about it. My friend up in Canada, Kevin Sekurs talks about it, you know, and people confuse fun with fucking around.
Yes.
You can have fun and have it be constructive in a format, or it can be an open format. But I love the example that Coach Kevin Sekurs talks about. He's like, listen, when a mother tiger, she doesn't line up her cubs and little white geese and they learn the first Fujao Pai strikes. She's like, that's not what they do. It's play. It is play. It's a primal thing. And I think, yeah, again, too many people confuse screwing around with something good and constructive with the play. Yeah.
So this commentary into sumo, you know, two things with that. The first thing is that, you know, people often, they only see the big guys. They only see the upper levels of sumo. And what I think some people don't realize is that there's no weight classes in sumo. So it doesn't matter what size you are, you're just with everyone. And so that has the rule sets that one plays under defines what is useful within the game.
Yes.
So, for example, we mentioned Irish collar and elbow earlier. Obviously, if you're not allowed to let go of the person's jacket, which is one of their rules, your feet and your arms being attached are going to necessitate that you use certain techniques. Likewise, in sumo, if you cannot touch the ground with anything other than your feet, you're not going to be doing a single leg or a double leg where you touch the ground first. So the rule set, at the end of the day, you know, I'm not going to say all martial arts, but at least within the grappling arts, they're all fundamentally the same, air quotes again. What makes them different, what flavors them differently is the win condition and the equipment. Do you have a jacket? Do you don't? Do you have a big belt like in sumo, or do you don't? Yeah, or do you not have it? You know, and then what is the win condition? Is it pinning the person like in wrestling? Is it throwing the person like in judo? But at the end of the day, those rule sets and that equipment is what defines what is useful. So it's not that when you go and train one of these arts, that what's useful in that art is useful in every other context. It's just what's useful in that game. So the more games you can play, the more complete your tool belt you can have.
I like that.
Because you can understand the context under, well, this is meaningful because I'm stuffed in a corner. So this came up in the law enforcement training. They had us start in less than ideal circumstances, like stuffed into a corner, or you're in Alaska in February in an ice puddle and the firemen are standing over there spraying you with a hose at 2 a.m. in the morning. You know, and then they spray you with pepper spray and now fight. You know, there was just, you know, the game had different rules. You know, in that case, the win condition was call for help. You know, survive long enough to call for help and then for help to arrive. So the win condition wasn't beating the other person or subduing. You know, the win condition was surviving long enough for help to show up. But little rabbit hole there for this idea that the more games we can play with, one, different win conditions, and then two, different scenarios, will result in, I think, a more robust training mechanism for almost any martial art. So
I really like that. You know, for me, everyone jokes around. They're like, so do you have a new Kung Fu style that you're coming up with? And I'm not. I don't have 100 lifetimes to figure that out. I don't train, frankly, enough to do that either. But, you know, from, you know, my Sifu, what he taught me is, you know, in Wing Chun, at least in our line, we have a jab, something like a jab. We have something like a cross. We have something like a hook and like an uppercut. And I'm like, well, you know, grappling can cross train so easy. Why can't striking arts do this? And so I have methodologies that I can put on a full boxing glove and goof around just with the Wing Chun boxing.
Right.
And I can work with somebody that does Western boxing. And I think a lot of people like that. I'm kind of coming up with some sets of that same with the Xingyi, but it's a little harder because there's a body quality that you have to, like, at least with, you know, the way, and I love Owen. He's my co-host and he's my friend, but he's also my teacher. And so when I hear him say, this is what I want your Xingyi to be, I listen and I try to train it that way. But it's something that I have, you know, I think a lot of my friends that practice like just a Japanese style, or even an Indonesian style, they have trouble like wrapping their heads around. I'm like, well, I could teach you a Xingyi application. But if you can't produce the body power that is Xingyi, that's the Xingyi. You train all the shapes and everything to create a body quality, and you try to embody that body quality. So I could do a Krav Maga application, but if I'm using the body dynamics of Xingyi, then to me it would be Xingyi.
Sure.
Just like if I showed you a Xingyi application, but you don't have the power method inside your body, you're not doing it. That would be the external. I hate using that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason it persists. I mean, it's not an fully accurate representation.
Right.
But, I understand what you're saying. And I wish we could find some way, because everyone has this standard way up here about what their art should be, and that's fine. The games need to happen down here where you can play and you need to make mistakes. So that's the kind of thing where I'd like to see, like Silat, Eskrima, Western boxing, Xingyi. I'd like us to find a way to play together. Not that we go and we look at it and we say, oh, that's not Tai Chi. Oh, that's not Xingyi. Oh, that's not Jiu-Jitsu. I don't care about that. What I care about is that we're trying to play with our tools in a way that lets us find a familiarity with our tools so that we can apply them in more serious contexts later. But we can't do that unless we're willing to take risks. And those risks come with the possibility of, air quotes, failure. Yes. And so this is something that's encoded into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu rolling. And I'm not saying everywhere, because you also have to have the right training partners. If you've got someone that's like trying to win the gold medal every single time, you're never going to be able to do this. You got to have people you trust. You can be like, I'm going to try that stupid thing, and I'm going to see if I can pull it off. And because I know this person isn't trying to kill me, I know I'm not going to suffer catastrophic spinal injuries and be able to come into training tomorrow again.
Yeah.
So if we can find some way to play together, I don't care about proving one art being better than another. This is another one of my.
I agree with you on that. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
I use the tool belt analogy. Maybe Xingyi is the hammer and Jiu-Jitsu is a wrench and Aikido is a screwdriver. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to criticize the screwdriver for not being able to do the saw's job.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
They're different tools for different problems. So, it's more a problem with the dummy who picked the wrong tool for the problem than it is with the tool itself. And so if we could find ways to play with different problems with different tools, man, I think we could. I'm not convinced that we can revolutionize martial arts, but maybe we can move us to the next step up so that in 1,000 years we got something better than where we've been for the last 1,000 years.
I agree. So here's what we're going to do. So you're going to be on more than once. I just want you to know that, because we have more topics to talk about.
Okay.
I am dying. I've had to pee since we started this conversation. So here's what I need you to do.
Okay.
I need you to spend the next 10 minutes solo.
Okay.
I want you to introduce your book.
Okay.
And I want you to tell the audience about the book. I'm going to pee. I'm going to come back. And I have one last question for you. So if you can jot down this last question, here's what it is.
Okay.
Are you finding, and then I want to be in on this one, because I got to use the bathroom. And again, you're going to introduce your book. Modern technology. I'm not taking you in the bathroom. I love my audience, but I'm not that comfortable. Frankly, I'd be comfortable with you. I think after 3 years of hanging out, I'd take you to the bathroom, but I'm not with my audience. So we're going to spare them. But here's my question to you.
Okay.
I believe that it's not just training either in a modern martial art, a modern sport, or a classical martial art. It's not just training that, but it's listening to how it's taught. Because what I've fallen in love with is different methods of teaching. That can be even in the same art. Like you've got 5 flavors of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at your school. Well, some of that is around body type, but how it's taught also is a methodology. So I want to talk about that and who you really find out there in the world.
Okay.
And so show everybody that amazing book, and I'll be right back.
All right. Sounds good. So to everyone that's still listening, I also wanted to just mention that I started my podcast due to a particular quote I came across. The initial quote, which was falsely attributed to Thucydides online, is the society that separates its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting by fools. Well, fast forward a little bit, I found out that there is no quote like that in Thucydides, but there is from a guy named William Francis Butler. And the actual quote is, "The nation that will insist on drawing a broad line of demarcation between the fighting man and the thinking man is liable to find its fighting done by fools and its thinking done by cowards." And this got me thinking that there is wisdom in the classics that is still applicable today, that the lessons learned by the people that came before us haven't changed. So as I travel about uh, in my life, I have taken to collecting small pocket-sized books, and I would pair that with solo training in various places, airports, hotels. Most recently, a lot of that Shuaijiao training. But I realized I wanted to put together a book that was basically what I wanted to bring with me on trips. So I put together a collection of, welcome back,
Thank you, sir.
a collection of quotes with some meditations and some training methods that is broken down into overt and covert training. The idea being that I have a certain level of comfort doing Shuaijiao exercises in the airport. I really could care less what people think. So I do full-on solo Shuaijiao workouts at the gate while waiting for the plane to arrive. I have other friends who they're not that comfortable doing that, and that's okay. So I have a set of what I call over exercises that have been sourced from places like boxing, Iaido, Shuaijiao, sumo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and a few other places. The idea being that there is always a place for us to train. You may be stuck in that airport for the next hour. You can be doing something. It doesn't have to be crazy. Going back to Randel and my conversation about efficiency earlier, there may be a more air quotes effective way to be training. But I guarantee you, doing a little bit is better than sitting in that seat next to the gate for the next hour. So these are small things that can be done no matter where you are, waiting at a bus. I've done them in hotel rooms. I've done them in airports. I've done them in my office. I've done them all, out. I've done them on top of a mountain after climbing up, hiking, and I'm waiting for my family to get back from picking the berries that they're collecting. There's always a way to be training, and so this small volume was meant as a pocket way to bring a little bit of training for the mind and a little bit of training for the body, no matter where you went. So that was kind of the point of the book. While you were gone, I also introduced them to the quote that started the podcast, which is kind of encapsulated in this little volume, is just this idea that we have to train both our bodies and our minds. And so I've picked out a number of quotes that I think you don't have to, there's like I said, a little meditation that I've written about the quote. And in some sense, that's meant to not only get, be the starter, just the ignition to get the thinking going for yourself. But the quote itself is meant to be applicable to anyone that's training, no matter what you're doing. I think one of my favorites is not actually a proper martial artist one, but comes from J.R.R. Tolkien, which is just this idea. You have to remember Tolkien fought in World War One, so
Yes.
the guy had combat experience. If I remember correctly, he was actually injured. But one of his quotes was, "War must be, while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend." And one of the things I find in the so-called combative or modern martial arts is this idea that violence is just a technical tool to be imparted to the student without any context of why or when you would use it.
Yes.
And this gets back to what you and I were talking about earlier, is you have to understand the problem and then pick the right tool. I once responded to a call where a young man with Down syndrome was sitting on top of his mother in a grocery store and raining down blows on her. A bloody mess. It was awful. Shooting that man may be legally justified, but is not what I would consider an optimal outcome. going hands-on with him is probably more optimal. But again, you don't want to put him in the hospital necessarily. I mean, that looks great in the newspapers. Local cop beats up Down syndrome boy, puts him in the hospital, gives him brain damage. You know, that's not an optimal outcome for anyone. So you have to understand the kind of violence you're facing. The bully on the playground is very different from the riot. The battlefield is very different from the angry parent at the soccer game. The road rage incident is very, very, very different from an attempted rapist. So if you understand the kind of violence, we can't simply teach violence to people. That's like, there's another quote I like. I can't remember the exact source just now. I can find it later. But teaching martial arts to people without compassion is like giving a knife to a crazy person. Everyone gets hurt. It's an old judo film from the 1930s where that came from. I'll have to look up. Sanshiro Sugata, I think is the name now that I said it out loud. But we have to train not only how to do violence, but why and when to do violence. And so a little bit of a rant there, but this I think
like
is at the heart of what unites all martial artists. If we have nothing else to talk about, that issue right there should unite all of us, because it's different. It's different where, you know, what country you're in, the flavor of violence that you're facing. Men and women face different kinds of violence on a global scale. You know, women tend to face predatory violence, whereas men tend to face what we call social violence. So, you know, men have that monkey game where they're like, and not always, of course, there are always exceptions. But the kind of violence that we are more likely statistically to face is different. And that includes whether you're in rural or an urban area, what culture you're from, whether you're an honor-based culture or not. I mean, we can go on and on. A quantification of violence, you can't simply say you're preparing for violence. You're not preparing for fighting. You're preparing for a set of problems. And the more problems we can look at, and the more, if you don't train your mind, you can't solve that problem of understanding the problem. So that's kind of the point of this little mini booklet, to bring with you wherever you go, and get a little physical training and get a little mental training. So,
well, now that my eyeballs aren't floating in my head, let's spend a little time, because that book seems like a great segue into, there's a little podcast that you have that's been out there for a while. And
right.
Do you believe that also kind of goes along with your podcast as well?
Yeah. You know, the first book that I looked at was called The Demon's Sermon on the Martial Arts, is what the William Scott Wilson translation changes the name to. But the Japanese one is Tengu Geijutsu Ron, which a Tengu is kind of like, you might think of as like a trickster, kind of like a fox spirit in some mythologies. And the guy that wrote this book, I think it was about 400 years ago. Everything he's talking about is the same stuff you and I are talking about now.
Yes.
Now, he's placed it in the context of a kind of Aesop's fable situation. Like, no one thinks that, you know, the tortoise and the hare actually had a race, but it communicates a principle that is meaningful to everyone. And I would say it has crossed numerous cultural, linguistic, and chronological boundaries. He's done the same thing here, where he took, his name is Isai Chozanshi, he took some of these martial arts conversations that people like you and I are having today, and he placed them in this Aesop's fable style of literature, to communicate, well, what's the difference between competitive and self-defense training? What's the difference between, you know, getting caught up in the nuance of details of forms versus, you know, the big angry guy that somehow just beats everyone up, even though he has no training. You know, he addressing, you know, 400 years ago, he was thinking about these things. And it's not just him, of course. There are numerous examples of this all over the world. But this was the moment where I was like, you know what? I'm tired of talking to people in my jiu-jitsu gym. They're like, man, I just realized this thing. It's really cool. If you do this thing, if we think about this a little bit differently, it makes a lot more sense. I'm like, that's what they were talking about centuries ago. And if we didn't discard this stuff, and we actually read it now, maybe we could shortcut. I'm not saying everyone has to, I've heard this said before, everyone has to do the training themselves. You can't just, unlike Neo in the Matrix, you can't just know Kung Fu. He doesn't have the body for Kung Fu. He doesn't have the, he may have the knowledge of it, but he can't make his body do what his mind thinks it can do when it comes to Kung Fu. And so what I'm suggesting here is that the classics are full of that kind of thing. You and I right now can train the body, but we need to have some way of injecting into the mind. We got to be like Neo with, I know Kung Fu, but you have the body because you've been training it already. And these classics shortcut us. People have bled, died for different lessons over the centuries. I mean, let's be honest, humanity, if we're not sitting in a cave trying to figure out how to make fire, it's because we're standing on the shoulders of other people before us. There are thousands of years of people who have come before us who have survived horrible things and have grappled with, no pun intended, grappled with the PTSD that comes from that.
Yes.
That, of both being a survivor and for the things done on the battlefield. Of, one of the earliest examples of the just war doctrine is in a Hindu epic about, is it justified to use this particular weapon against these people? And they're saying, no, it's morally not justified. It's the idea that like what we had where like mustard gas isn't allowed after World War I because we saw how horrible it was. Like even in war, there are standards of how low we can take ourselves. But that, I don't remember what it is, 2,000-3,000 years before, people were having that same question. So the classics are full of these lessons that if we just dig into it, and if we can just rotate a little bit of our mind to the point, because a lot of these can be couched in words and cultural norms and language that can be challenging to the modern mind to digest, that if we can grow our mental tools a little bit, we can access these lessons from these classics and apply them today and not have to learn them all over again and do all that bleeding and sweating and crying that they already did for us.
Yeah.
That's the point of the podcast. And it's been that from the beginning, and it's not changing.
That's great. That's great. Well, we have gone for almost an hour and a half. Is there any last thoughts that you wanted to cover? Who are you looking at for teachers out there? Who are you looking at? It's like, man, I really like listening to this podcast, or I really like listening, or I watched this teacher. On my show, I talk a lot. By the way, you're a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu cat. I'll give you two. Because of you, I found Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu BJJ meditations.
I like that guy.
I like Jersey Joe a lot too. As a matter of fact, he gave us a shout out because him and I have talked like you do. I've given him a couple ideas on Instagram, and he's like, "Oh, that's great. Thanks for." And I really like Joe. I hope you guys can have a great conversation someday together.
I feel a little bit intimidated by him. He's his thinking process is more honed than mine, and so I'm very impressed with him. We need more people like him in the martial arts world.
And yourself, sir. So don't be shy about that. Also, I'm a huge fan of Josh McKinney.
I thought you were going to say him.
Yeah,
I like him too.
I do too. The Aisaka Jiu-Jitsu show. His dad's in the 60s. They have a really good program of drills for folks that are in their 60s and over. And he's a first-time new dad now. I think he's just about to turn 30. So he's got. We are about 15 years older than him, but I really like Josh. I like how he talks like a coach.
Yes.
He talks like a coach. And so, I don't do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he talks about timing. He talks about pace. He talks about recovery. He talks about, maybe new training modalities or mindset. And I'm like, that's the kind of person I want to listen to, even though I don't do BJJ. And then maybe my favorite, and boy, somebody out there who's doing God's work, and we're going to have him on the show hopefully someday, is Fran Sands. I don't know if you've ever heard me talk about Fran. So I'll send you a link. Okay. He was on, I was talking about Sifu Russ Smith. His Sifu, Mark Wiley, has a great podcast called Transformations.
Yes, I've heard that one. Yeah, I've heard of that one.
And I've given him a couple people. He recently had on Derek Notman, who I've got to work with just a little bit, and I hope to work with in the future. Derek's super talented. Indian club swinger, Shingi Leoha guy. He does the 10 Animals method. And he had an excellent conversation on there. But he also Mark was hip to get Fran on there. So Fran Sands is a Western boxer, and he has a great YouTube channel called My Boxing Coach.
Okay,
Mathew, he's got probably over 300 free videos on Western boxing. And, you think about such a small sport with basically 4 hits, a jab, a cross hook, and an uppercut.
Sure, yeah.
And Fran takes that and shows you that it is far more than that. He's got distance drills. He's got bag drills. He's got, you name it. He's got a free book. He's got a free ebook. Yeah. 64 pages. Everything that's, and here's the other thing that Fran does, which is God's work. Him and 9 other coaches volunteer their time.
Yeah.
At a boxing club for youth, for troubled youth over in UK. And that club has been around for 50 years. And Fran started when he was 6 years old in 19, I want to say 78.
Okay.
Or it could have been 70. I want to say it was 78. And it was one of those things. His dad was like a dock worker or something like that. Just real old school. Yeah. And, the boxing club became like a babysitter so his folks could work. And his brother went there too. And it was one of those things where Fran was crying the first day and his dad's like, "You're going to go to this. This isn't, you know what I mean? It's like, you're going to do this."
Yeah.
And so Fran talks about his journey in the club, and now he's been with that club pretty much all of his life. And he's a coach there now. He's taken kids from, almost diapers, not quite, to, now there's a certain age that you have to be in the club, but he's basically taken them from, basic boxers to either amateur, or even some have turned pro. And I love how he breaks down a complex topic into very digestible bites. And for a dude that's in his mid 50s, he moves amazingly well. And so I think you would really love either watching his videos, but again, I don't study his style. I listen to how he shares the information and how he teaches the topic. And so I was wondering if there's anybody out there that you're kind of like, "Oh man, you guys got to check this dude out or this gal out."
Well, the thing is you actually have had a lot of them on there already. Ken Gullett is one guy that I've been listening to forever.
Amen.
I remember, podcasting. The reason it's called podcasting is once upon a time we had these things called iPods. No one really uses those anymore.
Yeah.
But I was listening to him back on an iPod.
Wow. I'll send that to him. I'm going to send this episode to him. He's going to love that. Yeah, that's amazing.
But I think the thing that stands out to me, which I'm going to, on the one hand, not answer the question the way that you probably want me to.
That's no. I like the Mathew Krueger ways of answering. That's why you're on the show, sir.
Thank you. So a little while ago, there's this guy in the jiu-jitsu world called John Danaher. He's kind of famous for training a bunch of people who've done well at competitions and stuff. I kind of think of him as like the Professor X of the jiu-jitsu world because his body's broken. He's never winning any tournaments on his own, but he clearly has the ability to teach people because he's produced multiple excellent grapplers.
Customato.
Yes.
Cuss teaching Tyson.
Too. Right. That's a great example. But he said something about, I've seen enough people come through here. I've seen just about every type of training. And not one of them has stood out as being better than the others. The key is that the person doing the training wants to keep doing it. And so if you can find either the person online, you mentioned Budo Brothers, I love them. I love their work. I bought their Eli Knight instructional. I love Eli Knight's work. I love his work with, dang it, what's the Krav guy? I forget his name now. But the fact is there's this giant network today of this information that you can just get on and find all this stuff. It's some people say it's a fad, but it's been around for a while now. So I think the internet might be a thing for a bit.
Yeah, who knows?
You need to find the person who communicates in the way that you get. And this kind of gets back to what I was saying about teachers, where one teacher can say the exact same thing as another teacher, but that other teacher says it in a way that you and I get it. So what I'm suggesting is that get out there, listen to everyone, try to find the people, if it's Josh McKinney, great. If it's Ken Gullett, great. Find the people that make you grow, that force you to grow. And I'm not even saying like you agree with them, but like they challenge you to think about why you're doing what you're doing. Find those people, consume all you can, meditate on it. And I guarantee you in a few years, there's going to be someone else out there that you can start working with on something else. So I'm not going to say there's always a good subset these days out there of people to listen to. And it's not always going to be consistent, but dang it, find the people that you can understand. I love John Danaher. I just mentioned his name, but darn it, if he's not a challenging guy to listen to in his instructionals, I have to put him on like 1.5 speed because he communicates differently than other people. So find the people that you're able to that force you to grow and help you understand and consume everything you can, talk to them. And, I hear this good little conversation, Kung Fu Conversations podcast. I just want to say in particular to you guys, you and Owen, you two are some of the most honest traditional Chinese martial artists that I have ever listened to. And it is...
Thank you.
You two are like, it's not just you two, obviously, but you two are the future of traditional Chinese martial arts. You've had conversations about how things should or should not change and how to preserve the essence of the arts. If people like you weren't having those conversations, yes, any martial art would die out. You cannot stay the same. We have to evolve. We have to grow. That doesn't mean the principles change, but the way it's like once upon a time, there was only scrolls and more than half the people weren't literate.
Yeah.
I mean, you go back and you look at who Chinese martial arts people were teaching. There's a reason there was poems and songs in the old books because you had illiterate students.
Yep.
And how do you remember stuff? We all remember advertising jingles. You give them a jingle, they can remember the stuff. So if we were still working on those old methods of training, I don't think we would be utilizing the tools we have today. They invented this thing called books. It's pretty cool. You might want to look into that. We don't need to just use, poems and scrolls anymore. Now we got this thing called video. Now we got this thing called podcasting. At the end of the day, you guys are, as best I can tell, the future of Chinese martial arts, and you're going to be the reason that this stuff survives. And
God, becomes, I hope not. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm serious. It's people like you, because you have to ask those hard questions. And that's those things like if any martial art is unwilling to ask the hard questions about themselves, they will stagnate and die. It's only those ones that are willing to look like, the example I use in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is we have this move called the Kimura. And I think in judo, it's called a Gyaku Ude Garami or something like that. But it's named after the guy that kicked Helio Gracie's ass.
Yep.
Like, that's what we call it. Like, and this is not a prop to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I like the fact that they were willing to say, hey, that guy kicked our ass. We're going to take the move. We're going to name it after him. And now it's a bread and butter white belt move that everyone learns.
Yeah. Like
everyone knows the name of the guy that kicked the origin, air quotes, origin, one of the founders' butts in a match. We need that kind of adaptability in all the martial arts. So.
Owen and I are both blue collar guys. We were raised in small mountain towns, just like yourself. We didn't have access to great stuff. It came later in our life, when we were old enough to get access to things. And I feel blessed. I'm still working with Sifu Mayer. Hopefully he'll keep me around a little longer. If not, I'll tip the hat to him and continue my own Wing Chun journey.
Sure.
And I'm still working with, Owen, God bless him, those kind of things. But I started Wing Chun my freshman year of college in 1998 at Mesa State College in Grand Junction, Colorado, with Ed Bonan Hamada. Tip of the hat to him in the math department for bringing in Sifu Mayer. And I started on the forums. I started on the forums. And so I started to notice that everyone had a similar legend and a similar origin point, but all the years were always different. So I'm like, well, maybe they look at history differently. So I asked that question. And also I realized that it was just a place where people were crapping on each other.
Yes.
Right. And so after 2 years of the forums at 2021, I was hip enough to be like, this is not where I need to be because I'm not doing my training here. And so, but what I did realize, and a lot of people will disagree, with what's going on at Shaolin today, what's going on at Wudon today, what's going on at Shen Village today, and what might have happened 500 to 1,000 years ago.
Right.
And here's the thing: if you love it, do it. If you love that stuff, do it. But what I started to notice was, I'm like, wait a minute, didn't they have a cultural revolution? What happened there? And then I also had to ask myself too. I love my group that I'm training with. When I was doing, I took a doctorate amount of time in college to do college. So I did 6 years at Mesa, and I did Wing Chun the whole time. And I asked myself, I'm like, am I going to stop doing this because it has no connection to Shaolin Temple? No, because I get benefit out of it. I love doing it, and I love the group that I'm with.
Right. Yeah.
Am I going to stop doing Xingyi because it wasn't invented at Mount Wudon? No, I'm not. Sure. I have a great teacher that's highly effective in the martial aspect, but also shows me, hey, is your knee hurting? Why don't you try this? Is your lower back hurting? Why don't you try this? He's my physiotherapist as well. God bless him. But Owen, gives me these prescriptive and personal practices. And so if a couple of dudes outside of Boulder, Colorado that work 9 to 5 jobs can ask these kind of questions, I don't understand why the other, not just Chinese martial arts practitioners, but why the other practitioners aren't asking these same kind of hard questions. And the other thing too is you don't have to agree with our answer because a lot of them, we don't actually give an answer. A lot of it is just, it's open-ended.
Yeah.
It's just the question needs to be asked, and it will be up to the practitioner to figure out what is the right answer for them.
And they have to. Anything else, is going to. I think a good example of this would be like if I try to, or if you were to try to give me a direct answer, let's say on Bong Sao. All right. Which one is that?
There we
still
go.
There? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
All right, so let's just say Chi Sao, okay? So let's say we're doing Chi Sao, right? And you try to give me just a direct verbal answer on a question about that. Is that going to be more effective than me having the realization myself while we're actually doing Chi Sao? Yes. That's going to sink into my head. So we need to have these conversations. But everyone else, including us, needs to go out and play with it and have the realization themselves. If you just hear it, that's one level of knowledge. If you realize it and apply it on your own, then you own it. It's a part of you. That's what we need more, so that the conversations lead into, or perhaps are the spark that sets the flame for the actual practical application of these things in real life.
I believe it's that wisdom practice. It's the knowledge bridge versus the wisdom, where it becomes a part of the body as well as the mind. That's another thing too that I love about the East. They don't separate those things. The body and the mind are one tool that live coherently together. And I think a lot in the Eastern training too. I was showing you the Indian clubs.
Yes.
They bridge mobility and strength, right? It's not just, I'm doing strength over here. I'm doing mobility over here. No, there should be a bridge. And I believe that, it's the same with the Eastern and the Western philosophies. There is a crossing point. They can live in their own bubble and be beautiful in and of themselves. But at some point, what are the bridges? Where's the intersection in the middle where those two can have the conversation and have the bridge? So,
So, so you guys, Byron Jacobs, William Wayne Williams, it's incredible, the authenticity, the truth, the willingness to ask the hard questions that I'm seeing coming out of the modern. This is where I don't like modern versus traditional. The modern traditional martial arts movement.
No, that's a thing. I call it that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So. I mean, the traditional martial arts have changed from where they were in the 70s and 80s, and prior to that, of course, too. And I think the big thing for me is you have to have these conversations if you want to survive into the next century. And JiuJitsu has to have these conversations now. The fact of the matter is JiuJitsu is around the same age as Aikido. And most people would label Aikido as being a traditional martial art. They both got their formal start in the 1930s-ish. And so Aikido is having a lot of these conversations too right now, where they're asking, we're seeing, I don't want to get into it. We've been going too long anyways, but the fact of the matter is they're having a lot of the same conversations that I think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu needs to have, that you and Owen talk about with the traditional Chinese martial arts. If any of us want to see people practicing something worthwhile in the next century, our martial grandchildren, we need to have these conversations now, so that there's something worthwhile to pass on later. So keep it up, please.
Thank you, my friend. Likewise, sir. Likewise, sir. Well, hopefully, I'm going to. Now, this comes out tomorrow. I found out working with Mathew Absakardu that this has to be crunched through the YouTube filter, if you will. So when it comes out tomorrow, I'm going to tag you here, and then I'll send you a link. And yeah, please feel free to share. And if you'll get me some glamour shots as well. Yeah. And thank you so much for your time. This conversation has been, 3 or 4 years in the making, and we finally got to do it. So love your show. I'm going to keep listening, and good training, and have a blessed day, my friend.
You too. Take care. Thanks for the conversation.
Take care, sir.
Bye.
Let's see if I can learn how to read.